How do I steal people's money? You got your free lunch scam. Get in on this opportunity right now, plus you get a free lunch. Your sweetheart scam, grandparent scam, those are exciting. Hello, Grandma? I'm in jail in Tijuana. They're telling me I need $3,000. Or if I'm feeling old school, I could just jump in your garbage. Come up with a credit card bill. Ka-ching. I'm now you.
Visit the AARP Fraud Watch Network to learn how to protect yourself from identity theft, fraud, and this guy.
My name is Elliott Greenblott, and many people call me Mr. Scammer because for the past 3.5 years, I've served as the AARP Vermont Fraud Watch Coordinator. We've got some guests today, and I want to introduce our two guests, unusual for me because usually we just have one on our program, but this is a very special program. We have Chris Curtis. Chris is the Chief of Public Protection Division in the Office of the Attorney General. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
And Lauren Jandl, who, did I get that right?
Jandl,
okay,
close enough.
Close enough. Jandl.
Yes.
Okay. Who's a small business advocate with the Consumer Assistance Program at the Attorney General's office. So welcome to the program, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourselves and about your role in the AG's office.
Sure. So I'm happy to start.
Go ahead.
So I am the small business advocate at the Consumer Assistance Program. I've been with the program for about 2 years now, and it's a partnership between the Attorney General's office and the University of Vermont. And the Consumer Assistance Program, I like to say that we serve 3 core functions. One is we provide an informal complaint mediation service. 2, we help consumers navigate state government and get answers to questions they might have, and also access other referrals to community resources. And 3, the reason why I'm here today is we talk to people about scams. So as a small business advocate in the Consumer Assistance Program, I do all of those 3 core functions, but for Vermont small business community.
Okay. So you do see businesses being scammed as well as individuals.
Yes, that is something we're hearing more and more of, particularly with fake orders for goods or services. So it's something I'm talking with small businesses about quite regularly these days.
Maybe later in the program we can review that piece. And Chris?
Well, I grew up in Charlotte, just up the road on Route 7, and went to the public schools here in Vermont, went to the University of Vermont, came home to attend Vermont Law School. And before I joined the Attorney General's office, I spent 10 years in practice representing low-income Vermonters at Vermont Legal Aid. And one of the things that I noticed in my work there, and one of the reasons I'm so passionate about consumer protection work, is because of the disproportionate burden that falls on low-income Vermonters, in particular when it comes to scam attempts. They often don't have the supports or resources or ability to reach out that middle-income or affluent Vermonters or Americans might have to combat scams. They also may not have the educational attainment of more affluent sectors in our communities. And so the risk potential and the disproportionate burden of scam and scam activity really falls hard on low-income Vermonters who don't have a lot of money to lose. So it's a primary concern for me, and it's one of the reasons that I was so delighted to join Attorney General Donovan when he came into office and bring that experience from the perspective of low-income Vermonters to ask the question, what can we do about this epidemic of scam and scam activity? How can we stop it? How do we do proper enforcement? And how do we get upstream and focus on prevention? So thank you so much for having us. We're happy to be here in Sunderland to talk about what we can do and what the community and your viewers can do to better protect themselves.
Well, thank you for being here. I want to just give you a scenario. And we often think of the crime, and it is a crime in terms of these scams, as being something that affects someone else until it hits home. And my scenario is very personal because this actually happened to my wife. She received a piece of mail from Key Bank, and the envelope was kind of nondescript other than the fact that it had the Key Bank logo on it. She looked at the envelope, said, don't have an account with KeyBank, so I'm sure what they're trying to do is sell me something. Tossed it in the recycle bin, and about a day later gets another letter from KeyBank. This time she was kind of curious, so she opened up the letter, and the letter was a letter of concern from the bank stating that there was a problem with her account. Now, we don't have an account with KeyBank. She doesn't have an account. We may have had one years ago, but we have a branch. I live in Brattleboro. We have a branch in Brattleboro. She went down to the Brattleboro branch, spoke to an officer in the Brattleboro branch. He said, oh yes, you opened up an account, gave her the date of the account that she opened up the account, and said, well, the reason why we're contacting you is there was an error in the data that you entered. And she said, well, I never entered the data. And he said, well, this was done online. All the information that one would need, Social Security number, address, references, everything in the application, but there was one error. And the individual opened the account, changed one of the dates, one of the digits on her birth date. And that's why they contacted her.
Wow.
Now, this obviously wasn't something we did, and I'm wondering, how you would react to that as something that would be reported to the AG's office.
Absolutely. Sure. I mean, we hear from thousands of Vermonters every year in situations just like the one that your wife experienced. And I will say, lucky you and lucky her that it was discovered that there was a digit off and that the bank caught it and alerted her. I mean, that's hugely important, and we're going to talk in a little while about partnerships that can be established to better stop scams in real time. But Lauren, maybe you can talk about the kinds of calls and examples just like this that CAP sees every day. Yeah,
I mean, this is unfortunately a very common call that we receive at the Consumer Assistance Program. And typically what we would say in that situation is if you are getting some type of contact that you know to be legitimate, so you went into your local branch of the bank and they informed you that an account had been opened using your information, that means that you are unfortunately a victim of identity theft. And so from there, we would talk through the caller with the kind of very concrete steps that we would recommend that people take, typically starting with contacting local law enforcement to make an official report of identity theft with law enforcement so that you have documentation of that event. We would then typically recommend that someone check their credit report, because that KeyBank account may just be the tip of the iceberg, and there could be other accounts with businesses you may not know of. So checking your credit report is free, and it's a great way to identify that. And then from there, going through and freezing your credit report so that you can prevent future fraud, and then also contacting any of the entities that accounts may have been opened with fraudulently. So again, that's something we're very aware of here at CAP, and we talk through with folks all the time. So we really want to have those conversations and give people individual specific advice on how they can react in those situations.
No. You know what? This is one of the things that I love about what the Attorney General has directed us to do. When TJ Donovan came into office, he said, I want you to do two things. One is, we're a law enforcement agency, but we can do a lot around community education and outreach. So we need to do more on the prevention side. Deliver actual services to Vermonters and prevent bad things from happening to good people. And he said the second thing is, we're not going to solve all the problems from Montpelier. Get out of the office. Go into communities. We were in Springfield last night. We're in Sunderland today. We're going to be in Newport next week. And the message is the same. Part of it is, what can we do to assist you? Part of it is, we want to hear from you, the stories that you just shared. And we incorporate that into the work that we do every single day into systemic reform and problem solving. You'll recall last year, a year ago today, there was the Equifax data breach. Millions of Americans, probably virtually every adult Vermonter, exposed to a security breach with one of the major credit reporting agencies. One of the things we did in response to that was go to the Vermont legislature and say, it is not right that through no fault of their own, Vermonters have had their data exposed from this credit reporting agency. One of the remedies that we always offer people is to say, go and freeze your credit report. What that does is it means that somebody can't just go and open an account in your name. That will stop an identity theft account in its tracks, because the banking insurance, when they go to check your credit score, can't pull that record. It's frozen. So it's a very constructive step if you're worried that you're a victim of identity theft that you can take to stop that from happening. But the credit reporting agencies in Vermont were allowed to charge up to $15, $10 to freeze and $5 to unfreeze those credit reporting, to do that freeze. We said, that's not right. That's not fair. That's not the Vermont way. There shouldn't be a fee associated with that. And so the legislature, after hearing our testimony and after hearing from hundreds of Vermonters on the issue that called our consumer assistance program, said we're going to eliminate that fee. So now Vermonters can go and freeze their credit reports at no cost to themselves. So that's a very important, it might seem like a small thing, but if you're doing that over time, don't forget, you may have a legitimate need to unfreeze that account, right? So you may be freezing and unfreezing over a period of years, especially if you know that your identity information is out there while you try to get your credit reports repaired and whatever else you may need, change your credit cards over, but you might need to get a new credit card. You might need to take out a new home loan. So that means you have to unfreeze and freeze potentially repeatedly. So those costs add up. And we didn't feel like that's a burden that Vermonters should have to bear.
Even things like leasing a car. Where any place where you have to have a credit report issued would be an issue for that.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And just to really highlight what Chris is saying, freezing your credit report when you know that you've been a victim of identity theft, or if you suspect you may be a victim of identity theft in the future, that's really the best way that Vermonters can take back control of their personal sensitive information.
Now, we in AARP know that the likelihood of an individual being compromised, data being compromised, is very high. And while something like the Equifax breach may have gotten a lot of publicity, and recently the Starwood Marriott breach obviously
another big one.
got a lot of publicity. There are a lot of folks in Vermont who are going to say, well, I didn't go to a hotel, I don't have to worry about this. And we're trying to spread that message that it isn't a single breach that people need to be worried about, but it's multiple breaches, and the reality is that your data may have been compromised 2, 3, 4, 10 times based on Anthem Blue Cross being breached, the IRS being breached, the hotel chains, restaurants. Is that what you folks are seeing as well?
Yes. I think it's really important that people know that we're all at risk, and there might be instances where your information, as you were suggesting, could have already been breached or compromised, and you may not even be aware of it. So a good first step is to always keep your eye on your credit report and just make sure that you don't have any suspicious activity, because we should all be really aware of this issue.
Well, and here's the thing. I think the big takeaway is don't panic, be vigilant. And that means periodically checking your credit report. It means checking in with your financial institutions. It means monitoring your bank accounts and those kinds of activities. Because, as I said before, this is really epidemic in our culture today. There are telephone scams, email scams, mail scams, people showing up at your home scams. It really runs the gamut. So I think that for bad actors out there, they have determined that there's a great vulnerability out there. And we lose millions of dollars every year to criminals who are preying on unwitting victims who, we're Vermonters. By nature, we want to trust. Our instinct is to trust our friends and neighbors and trust the calls that come in. That's why it's so disturbing that now you'll see things like spoofed telephone numbers. It's a telephone number that is not actually showing you where the call is originating from, but it gives a phony number. It might even look like it's coming from an 802 area code. So the trusting,
even your local exchange.
Even a local exchange. So the trusting Vermonter picks up the phone thinking that this is a local call, and suddenly there's a whole story that's being spun, and if you're not really careful, you might be going down a path where you're exposed. And so some of the common sense tips that CAP will always say is, don't give out your financial information over the phone, especially with an unsolicited call. Check your mail regularly, like your wife did, so that you open up that envelope and just check and see. If it's really junk mail, easy enough to toss it in the recycle bin. But if you're getting an actual notice from a financial institution, you probably want to know about that. So there are a range of things that Vermonters can do to protect themselves. That's why CAP is here. We're here to help. But I think the message is, don't panic, be vigilant.
I think a lot of people may also be confused about what a freeze actually does. And it's important to know that the freeze doesn't affect your current financial relationships. So if you have credit cards, bank accounts, those aren't going to be blocked or stopped. You're still going to have freedom of use, but it also means that you need to double check those statements and those accounts.
Absolutely. And I think, just going back to the point Chris was making, I think it's important that people realize that oftentimes when we think about identity theft and data breaches, we think of really sophisticated hackers going onto websites, mining social security numbers. But things as simple as giving your social security number on the phone because you think you're speaking with an IRS agent, that's also going to put you at risk of identity theft. So it's not just these really sophisticated scammers, it can be these kind of phone calls that we may not even realize initially that it's a scam until later down the line.
Now, some of these scams, some of the fraud, we know there's very little you can do. I mean, in terms of law enforcement and prevention. So should people still report these things?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So on the enforcement side, you've hit the nail on the head, right? What we want to do is get upstream and prevent these things from happening through education and awareness, because if you're dealing with a scammer that's calling from some boiler room in, Eastern Europe or somewhere in Asia or overseas generally, there's no jurisdiction. You're never going to hail that person in a court. Very difficult for law enforcement even to trace it back, especially through the use of either mirrored websites or telephone numbers and phony directories. So very difficult to enforce or prosecute. So the challenge that we have is to raise awareness, to give people tools to protect themselves, and then to get out in the community and do exactly what we're doing today, which is to hear the stories, respond, and give people the tools that they can to protect themselves.
Right. So I want to take a little time and talk about CAP, Consumer Assistance Program. This has been around for a few years, and I gather that it's getting more recognition in terms of use by Vermonters. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it does seem that the trend has been we're getting more contacts each year through phone calls to our hotline, emails, complaints. So we're happy to hear that Vermonters are aware of our service and are accessing it.
We've been kind of tracking it based on the reports that you folks have, and it appears that there's roughly a 25% increase in the number of reported scams or attempted scams year to year. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's been a big jump, and I'll tell you, part of that is just greater awareness. Another complement to everything we've been doing internally within the office, the Consumer Assistance Program is really the outward-facing public access point for Vermonters with complaints on a whole host of issues, and in particular on scams. We take about 13,000 to 15,000 calls every year from concerned Vermonters, and Attorney General Donovan has really said we need to jumpstart our CAP program. It's been a great program for nearly 40 years in the state of Vermont. It's a partnership with the University of Vermont. We're very proud of that. We train students and educate students about consumer protection. They work on the hotlines with our wonderful professionals like Lauren. But he said, we got to do a better job of making this a known resource, providing prevention tools to folks online and on the phone, and even doing a better job of reaching out to the small business community, which is why a new and improved access point for CAP is this small business initiative that Lauren spearheads to be reaching out to our, small businesses are consumers too. And they get scammed as well. And they have an interest in the financial health and well-being of their communities. And they also don't want to be the ones who get their phone number spoofed, so somebody else is falling into a trap of thinking they're paying a bill or what have you, or corresponding with someone that they don't know. So this is out there, it's everywhere, and CAP is kind of this new and revitalized place for people to get help. It's not unlike the work that you do with AARP. And I just wonder if you can share with us, AARP is an essential partner. Our consumer assistance program works with AARP, going out to the scam jams and educating the general public and the membership. I just wonder if you can tell us a little about AARP's efforts in this area, because they really complement what we're trying to do at CAP.
Yeah.
Sure. We collectively, AARP has been involved in this program, the Fraud Watch Network, for, I would say 5 to 6 years, very actively. Program began based on complaints or concerns that came to various state offices of AARP or the national office about people feeling they're being scammed, they're being faced with fraud, and AARP didn't have an answer at that point to say, here's what we need to do. Pilot program was started with, I believe, 6 states. Vermont wasn't one of them, but New Hampshire was. And based on that pilot, the program expanded. We're now in all states. Different levels of involvement. Vermont happens to be one of the more involved states in the program. But our objective is to educate, to provide resources and information to people. We do a online hotline for people. There's a national toll-free call number. There are alerts that are sent out by AARP. Tend not to be like the ones from the Attorney General's office, which are Vermont specific. Ours are more generic in that when reports are coming in from around the country, we figure at some point it's going to come to Vermont. Whether it's in Vermont today, odds are it will get to Vermont shortly if it hasn't already hit us. So the whole effort is to do public education, public resources, and as a public education mode, we do presentations around the state. You'd mentioned our scam jams and fraud forums, and we're very happy to be joined by the AG's office when we do those. Also, the Department of Financial Regulation plays a very big role with us as far as a resource to us and also a partner in delivering these programs. We distribute literature. We hold what we call shred fests. Arrange for a
I love it.
we arrange for a shredder truck to appear at a location, and people are invited to bring their boxes, 3 boxes limit, but often people bring more of their documents, because we're trying to get people to clean out the closet, not by putting things into recycle where there's a clear danger, but bank statements, Medicare statements, hospital statements, credit card reports, things like that. Anything that has personally identifiable information, bring it to a shred fest, get it in the chopper and have it removed. If we don't have one scheduled, we're urging people to do shredding by either purchasing a shredder at home, or if they have a lot of shredding, contact their bank or financial advisor, because most of those folks have shred trucks that appear regularly, and they may be willing to cover that kind of task for people.
What a great idea. I was not even aware of the Shred Fest, but I love that. And it really tells me, I mean, this is the work that AARP does in this area is so critical, is what we need more of. AARP does a great job. We need more of it. And you mentioned some of the other partners around the state. DFR is an essential. The Department of Financial Regulation that you mentioned also has a consumer hotline for banking and insurance issues. They're a great resource. We partner with them routinely. And even within the Agency of Human Services, Dale does a great job, and other agencies are working actively to prevent scams from happening. So thank you for the work you do.
Other basically private sector groups such as COVE, Community of Vermont Elders, the Senior Medicare Patrol. There are resources that Vermonters can tap.
You know, and let me put in one other plug, an essential actor in state government, and I want to commend and thank Treasurer Beth Pierce. She has undertaken a huge effort to bring financial literacy. And I mention it because the financial literacy piece is not just specific to scams, but it's how to sort of wisely marshal your resources and save and plan and all of those elements. But part of that is protecting those resources too. And I think there's a great opportunity there. I don't know where that's going to go in the future, she's established a working group. And as they start to think about how to partner with other agencies around the state and roll out financial literacy, protecting yourself from losing those resources could be a key element. It might be something that AARP wants to explore at some point, or maybe our office wants to explore at some point. But she's a real champion, and of course money matters.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you. We're actually going to do a second show with you. My guests today have been from the Attorney General's office. We've had Lauren and Chris, who have provided us with a lot of insight on what services are available to Vermonters from our state government. I invite you to tune in again to our next program, which will further explore what services come from the Attorney General's office, as well as some of the steps that people can take in order to be wiser consumers and be, if not immune, at least better protected against fraud and scams.